Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Sports and Leisure History Look Back. I'm Jeff Klein, and I'm all here with the most clutch sports mind out there, my good friend Clayton Hamilton. How you doing, Clayton?
I am doing great. Huge weekend this weekend.
Well, it's a huge weekend. Yeah, we got a lot of basketball on the show coming up, but there was also just one game today, but a big game. It was Game 7 between your Cavs and the Pistons. What did you think of that series? What did you think of that game?
I was pleasantly surprised that Cleveland didn't act like Cleveland today, and they got out to a lead and they held it, which, when does that happen in the NBA? You're always fearful of the third quarter. The first 6 minutes of the third quarter often changes the tide of the game, and today Cleveland played well, and Cleveland did not act like they were from Cleveland. And I don't maybe God had the day off today because it was Sunday, because we all know God hates Cleveland, but not today. Not today.
Yeah, what do we always, when we're texting each other during games, what do we always talk about? That 15 points when that team gets...
Yeah, 15 points is like, you might as well be tied. 15 points, like, if you have to keep it above 15, because the moment it gets to 15, like, the lead disappears all the time. But today, they got out to a good first quarter and were able to maintain, and they'll hopefully be able to play well against the Knicks. I still have said for quite some time that the Knicks are going to be in the NBA Finals, and will the Knicks be able to beat OKC, provided OKC gets by San Antonio, which they probably will, but we'll see.
Yeah, I saw that San Antonio games. It looked pretty convincing. It's amazing how quickly San Antonio's turned their franchise around with Wemby, and they were kind of at the doldrums of the NBA, and now they're just like one of the premier franchises again.
The De'Aaron Fox trade was really good for them, and Stephon Castle has, I think, improved at a greater rate than they were even anticipating. And to have those two guys controlling the ball, they've been wonderful. Kendall Johnson and, of course, Harrison Barnes. They have some solid veteran presence to go along with Wemby. And San Antonio and OKC, I really hope they give us the series that we're all wanting and hoping for.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that series. I wasn't a big Wemby guy, only because you see so many of these tall, lanky guys come into the NBA and they can't cut it physically, but he's been great. And, I mean, he's obviously had some, kind of banged up here and there, but overall he's been fantastic for them.
Yeah,
so
and as he
love watching him.
And as he continues to grow, let's not forget, he's still a baby, so he's still got some man strength to put on, and I think that he will, and it will be good. You know who does have man strength, Jeff? You're like, no, you have no idea what sport I'm going to. I'm going to the Giro d'Italia, and I wanted to give a quick shout out to Jonas Vingegaard from Team Jumbo-Visma, who won 2 stages in the Giro this week, and he became the 115th rider to win a stage in all 3 Grand Tours. He's about 3 minutes back in second place, but all the high mountains yet to come. He will probably win this year's Giro, and then he will have the Grand Slam, all 3 of the Grand Tours. So congrats to him. And also a quick shout out to Elena Svitolina, who won Rome this week over Coco Gauff in a really good 3-set match, 6-4, 6-7, 6-2. But Coco, you got to get that serve down. 7 double faults again. Even though she's defending champion on clay at Roland Garros the end of the month, she's got to get that serve worked out. But it was great to see Svitolina finally play well for a continued length of time, because she's tends to be as up and down as her husband, Gael Monfils. But she looked fantastic in the ladies' final. So congratulations to her in Rome.
Yeah, I hope Coco can get the mechanics down on her serve. I know she's been tweaking it and tooling it. It feels like forever now. It's keeps her. That's her biggest obstacle, is just herself, right? It's and so hopefully she can get back to that consistent, dominant form that we expected from her earlier in her career. You know who wasn't dominant this weekend? I was watching the Angels, the Los Angeles Angels, or I still call them the Anaheim Angels. But I was watching the Angels, and they lost 6-0, 15-2, and 10-1 in the Sunday finale. And those seemed like big blowout scores, and they were. But I think they played even worse than those scores show. They just looked so fundamentally bad. It was like watching a bad rec league softball team playing against sort of the high powered, sort of perennial neighborhood softball powerhouse. They just look bad, like just so lost. I don't really know what the plan for the Angels front office is, but whatever they're doing, it's not working.
Well, one, you don't just get rid of Luis Rengifo and expect your season to be fantastic. But at least Joe Adell is finally starting to play like the player that they anticipated that he would. And he had a pretty slow start to his career. He's one of those guys that there's a lot of anticipation for his arrival, and he got off to a bit of a slow start. But every time that I do see the Angels play, he seems to be a standout among a bunch of mediocrity.
Yeah, I think honestly, what the Angels need to do is just strip that team down to the studs, ship off anyone who has any value. I mean, Joe Adell, even if he turns into a regular All Star every year, by the time they're back to competition level, he's going to be past his prime. They need to get prospects in. They need to trade Trout, which I know they're hesitant to do. They got to trade Joe Adell, who's now got some value. Soriano looks like he's got some value. So I think if that's what the Angels should do, you just feel bad watching them, feel bad for their fans.
But didn't Artie Moreno say that winning isn't necessarily the number one priority? So there you go.
Yeah, and it shows.
Hey, you know what? I still like that you can get in and out of that parking lot really quick, and they don't completely slam you on parking.
That is true. It's much easier to navigate. All right. Well, let's move on and get to our history from this past week. So we're going to cover starting from May 11th all the way through May 17th. And we posted a lot on basketball. And we're going to start off talking about the Celtics and the Lakers. On May 14th, 1981, the Celtics with Hall of Famers Larry Bird, Robert Parrish, Kevin McHale, and company beat the Rockets in 6 games to get their first of 3 NBA championships from the 80s. The other 2 came in 1984 and 1986. And then the next day we posted about 1982 when the Lakers swept the Spurs in the Western Conference Finals, making them the first team in NBA history to sweep back-to-back 7-game series. And then they'd eventually go on to beat the Sixers in 6 games to win their second of 5 1980s decade championships. They also won it in 1980, 85, 87, and 88. And the NBA, the 1980s for the NBA was really all about the Celtics and the Lakers. 2 other teams won a championship in that decade. We had Philly in 1983, but the Pistons in 1989. But overall, even in those 2 years when the Celtics or the Lakers didn't win, they were in the finals. The Lakers were in the finals. So it was all about those 2 teams. And what do you remember about that decade, or thinking back, how important was that rivalry in the 80s?
Well, it was important because for the first time, it really became a rivalry. For the longest time, they had met in the finals, but the Celtics would win every time in the finals. 12 times. Celtics have won had won 9, and the Lakers won 3, and all 3 of them came in this decade. So up until this point, it wasn't necessarily a rivalry, right? It's never a rivalry until both teams win. But just seeing the same 2 teams, one of them or both, in the final for 10 straight seasons kind of set the tone. Right at the time that the NBA was gaining its popularity, it, for a very long time, was well behind the NFL and Major League Baseball in terms of popularity, and it didn't have the same television exposure that it started to get into that decade. Remember, ESPN had NBA games up until like 1980 to 82, and then CBS started doing the Saturday game, and that was something that regular access to the NBA, albeit mostly just after football season was over. We're talking January, February, March, that you would have those Sunday games, but at least it was something when most of the time you couldn't even see your local team on television very often. I remember watching the Cavs on WUAB out of Cleveland, and they would only have 25 to 35 games a year out of the whole 82-game season. So to get that consistency on Sundays was fantastic, and it was almost always the Celtics and the Lakers.
Yeah, and I think with the start of, Bird and Magic had their rivalry, their famous game going back to the college championship, where Magic's Michigan State beat Bird's Indiana State teams. So they had sort of that star cachet even coming into the NBA, and then that carried forward. And this was also the time when the VCR started getting popular, and so the league went from sort of a sort of an afterthought for a lot of fans to must-see TV because you wanted to catch the Bird versus Magic rivalry, or you wanted to catch the Lakers play, or you wanted to catch the Celtics play, and then fans had the opportunity to record games. They whole like black market underground VCR tape trading emerged, and the NBA jumped on that new technology by encouraging teams to start taping a lot of their highlights, sending them over to the league where they could start promoting a lot of these sort of highlight reels and really market the game a lot better.
And they also went to live only sometime in the 80s, because they used to have games on tape delay that would come, especially West Coast games, where they would tape delay the East Coast games and then air them on the West Coast on tape delay. And so they started to have a lot more live games as well. But one of the things that I think that made this decade important for the growth of basketball was the familiarity.
Right.
And we all know that you need to be familiar with whomever you're watching in order to care about them. And it wasn't just that it was constantly the Celtics and the Lakers, but the Celtics and Lakers rosters remained largely unchanged for that decade, at least at the star level. And you had 6 Hall of Famers on that Lakers team with Kareem and Magic and James Worthy and Michael Cooper and Jamal Wilkes, Bob McAdoo, and you had a Hall of Fame coach in Pat Riley, who was there for 1982 on. And then on the Celtics, the other side, Tiny Archibald, Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, Dennis Johnson, Artis Gilmore, Bill Walton, and you had 2 Hall of Fame coaches in Bill Fitch and Casey Jones. And so there was a lot of star power, and it was concentrated, and it was there for the majority of the decade. And you really sort of became either a Laker fan or a Laker hater, or a Celtic fan or a Celtic hater.
Yeah, and I think the personalities of the teams were so different, right? So you had the Showtime Lakers with, they were flash, they were fast break, they were, Pat Riley really had that, run and gun kind of action on the court, and then the Celtics were sort of that blue collar, grind it out, physical mentality. And I think depending on sort of as a fan, what your preference in style was, you kind of gravitated towards these teams, and the familiarity with the star players, as you mentioned. It's like you could tune into the finals, or you could tune into sort of the game of the week, and you could sort of gravitate towards sort of who you liked or who you wanted to root against, right? Because that, nothing drives sports like rooting against a team. So I think there was that whole, like you said, the familiarity, but also the styles really defined those teams.
And the styles, at least for the Lakers, the creation of Showtime, that was an absolute Pat Riley thing, because Paul Westhead, who was the head coach before, he was a slow tempo guy, and he and Magic clashed all of the time about how this team should be run. And Jerry Buss had to make the decision: do I go with my head coach who won me a championship, or do I go with my star player? And, you go head to head with $1 million player. Even back then, the coach is going to lose. And once he did, and Pat Riley came in to create that new up-tempo offense, everything really took off for the Lakers in a way that they had been good enough to make it to the finals, but had been stagnant up until that point.
Yeah, and I think on the Celtics side, it was similar, right? You had Bill Fitch, and then who was, had some success in the early part of the 80s decade, but then Casey Jones takes over, and he brings in a little bit more relaxed approach, letting stars sort of be their own person and have their own personality, where Fitch was more of an authoritarian type figure. and he really clashed with players like McHale, and that really, I think, is emblematic of sort of that decade, right? Where is sort of the rise of these stars and the brand that comes with those stars and the brand that comes with the teams, and sort of both teams were on that kind of trajectory that really defined the NBA moving forward.
And you saw that, societally, that people were taking more agency over their own life, and these teams were very capable of policing themselves and creating their own locker room culture, and in a way that everybody was sort of programmed to be a more robotic player in the 60s and 70s. And this was a huge freedom of expression. These kids that grew up in the 70s in a different world and had a different view of themselves and a different view of what agency they had, and they were really able to translate that into what is Los Angeles Lakers culture, what is Boston Celtics culture, and they did it better than any of the other teams. And let's face it, they were way more stacked than anybody else that was playing in the 80s, save a little bit of Houston and a little bit of Philadelphia, who were the closest thing that they had to somebody that was going to knock them off.
Yeah, and you saw this sort of the fans really sort of picking up that mantle and taking on some of that personality. And something that we hear now a lot whenever sort of an LA team sort of travels around is the Beat LA chant. But that really grew out of the 1982 series where the Celtics are losing to the 76ers, right? And the 76ers are going to move on and play the Lakers. But Boston fans hated LA so much they wanted the Sixers to move on and beat the Lakers. But, everyone hears it now. They think it's anti-LA chant when LA is playing their team, but it really actually was more about we'd rather have the team that just beat us go forward and beat LA. And I know I'm out from LA. I love LA, as you know, but I also understand we're not that well liked in a lot of the country, and so that's really caused sort of a sports culture phenomenon to take on, where now you hear it in the Bay Area, you still hear it on the East Coast with the Celtics fans. But it's something that kind of grew out of that fan-oriented, personality-driven NBA.
I have, Jeff, on occasion participated in Beat LA, and it is fun. It is a fun thing, but like I said, it's always fun to have somebody to hate. And like I said, I hate the Lakers, but I don't hate the Lakers. It's sports hate. It's not real hate. It's something to root against. Typically in the NBA, I follow players and teams, and who I'm interested in watching changes from year to year. But I still have that sort of childhood scar of the Lakers beating the Celtics. My dad was a huge Larry Bird guy, so I kind of grew up with seeing just almost as many Celtics games as Cavs games, because they seemed to be more available. They were on national TV, where the Cavs almost never were. And so I sort of had that initial draw, not even towards the Celtics so much as against LA. And part of it too was I loved Hakeem Olajuwon. And I enjoyed Ralph Sampson, and when the two of them were in Houston, and they would come down to Houston, LA in the playoffs, I always wanted to see Hakeem Olajuwon win, and so it was like double whammy. I'd root for Houston, and they would lose, and then I'd root for the Celtics.
Yeah, the thing I appreciate about you as a sports fan is that you do definitely hate a lot of teams and a lot of players, but it is that sports hate. And you're also pretty realistic about it, because when your favorite team doesn't win, you understand why. Yeah. Usually you can break it down.
I'm pretty fair. I try to be anyway. But, I certainly have rooting interest. And all those people that are like, media people shouldn't be fans, and they shouldn't. We all do. Like, we all, at the end of the day, would like a good story and a good game. But it's great when the good story and the good game can, feed your childhood trauma. And help you get over all the losing teams that I have supported in my life.
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to bring up really quick on this topic is that the NBA was going through a growth period also in the 80s, right? They had some expansion teams, and I think I was thinking about this and curious your thoughts. I think those teams really benefited from sort of that rivalry and the rise in popularity that Magic and Bird, Lakers, Celtics really brought, because without that sort of new understanding in the media that, hey, the NBA can be a really good entertainment product, can be really marketable, and there is definitely a huge revenue stream that we're going to start to see if we market this correctly, which media started doing, right? As we said, it went from sort of more tape delayed type game to a lot more live. And so you had the Mavericks, which at the beginning of the 80s, that was the 1980s, the Mavericks came on board. But then at the end of the decade, you have the Hornets, the Heat in 88, and then the Magic and Timberwolves in 89. And without the success and the rivalry of the Celtics and Lakers, maybe we don't see those teams come around.
And you also started to see teams staying put.
Yeah.
And growing in communities. And we have had movement since. There's been the exodus of Charlotte to New Orleans, and then the rebirth in Charlotte. We saw Vancouver go to Minnesota. But a lot of times in the early NBA, there was a ton of movement. Remember, there used to be teams in Rochester and Buffalo and Cincinnati and St. Louis. And even at the start of that decade, the Kings were in Kansas City before Syracuse. They moved out to Sacramento. And there's Syracuse. Yeah, so there were tons of movement. And that really started to settle down and anchor into these teams that were really important parts of their community.
Well, yeah, and I think that's a reflection on sort of the NBA becoming financially healthy, which in the 70s they were on really shaky financial footing. And so if you feel good about your product and you feel it's a solid source of revenue and it's profitable in the community, you're not going to move it. So I think the stability we saw and really sort of the legacy, 2026, what we're seeing now, it's really the legacy of all the 80s basketball and the almost kind of like a rebirth of the NBA.
Yeah, and it's really it's so rare to see a rivalry that has developed so much in a championship setting like that. You think about baseball and the Yankees and the Red Sox being in the same division, and the Cardinals and the Cubs and the Dodgers and the Giants and all of those things. And the closest you would come in baseball would be, that rivalry between the Yankees and the Dodgers, because they've met, a handful of times in the World Series, but nothing in comparison to what we've seen with LA and the Celtics and meeting all of those times in the championship.
Yeah, so I wanted to also talk about some more basketball. We something we had posted about the original Dream Team. And so Magic and Bird throughout the 80s, they were huge rivals, as we've been talking about. But in 1992, they became teammates on the original Dream Team. And while the Lakers and Celtics have their share of fans and haters, there's a person who was on the Dream Team who definitely has a lot more haters than fans. And that's Christian Laettner. And I think a lot of people forget that he was placed on the Dream Team because they sort of established this sort of, not an Olympic rule, it was just their own sort of house rule, that they wanted to have at least one college player to be sort of pay homage to the tradition of the Olympics being amateur. And so I think looking back, Alonzo Mourning was passed up, and then Shaq is one that always people bring up. They were all college players, those three, but they went with Christian Laettner. So was that the wrong decision at the time?
I don't think it was the wrong decision at the time. And I like that they did this because they didn't need the 12th player to be an NBA guy to win. Right? You didn't need that. And it had been amateur, at least in the United States, all the way through. And it had gotten to the point where you're playing guys on the Soviet Red Army team. You're playing guys that are pros in Europe. And we were the only ones that were still sticking to the amateur. And they said, you know what, in deference to the amateurs and those guys that are being robbed of their opportunity to go to the Olympics because of the shift from amateur to pro, we're going to keep one of these guys. Christian Laettner, he was two-time champion, 4 years. He had been to the Final Four. He was the National College Player of the Year. He checked every one of those boxes. And we look back now and people are like, oh, he's terrible. He's like the worst bust in the history of the NFL. He's garbage. I hate Christian Laettner. They should have had Shaq. Well, nobody knew Shaq was going to be Shaq at the time. It's not like they passed up Kobe, Shaq, right? They passed up college Shaq, who had a handful of holes in his game, who played Christian Laettner twice in college and lost twice and got outscored and out-rebounded by Christian Laettner in one of those games. And he was very close in the stats on the other of those games. And so for me, Christian Laettner was the right pick and the right person to be able to handle what it was like being the college player on that team of Hall of Famers.
Yeah, I mean, and Coach K was on the coaching staff. He wasn't the head coach. So, people will sort of point to that and be like, oh, it was favoritism because Coach K wanted his Duke player. But even Shaq later admitted that Laettner was the more polished player. In hindsight, obviously I'm sure Shaq would have loved to be on that team, but he said that. And I think Shaq also made a good point in some of the commentary I've seen from him, is that they felt that Laettner staying in college all 4 years was something symbolically they still wanted to promote and wanted to highlight. And so I think that really helped Laettner as well to get on that team. And I think something to your point is, you're not the player who gets added, whatever college player it was, is not going to make or break this team. So it's someone who just can kind of stay out of the way, not steal the limelight from any of the star players that are on there, be good in practice, and help the team where possible. Interestingly, actually, everyone kind of looks down on Laettner and his performance in the 1992 Olympics, but he actually has better stats than John Stockton. He played slightly more minutes than John Stockton. So, come on, cut the guy some slack.
And it's also a thank you to the commitment that Christian Laettner made to USA basketball. He had been on USA teams for 8-9 years. He'd been, the under 18s and the Pan Am games and all of qualifying and whatnot in a way that Shaq had not been. And he had been a part of the USA basketball family for a long time. And they're saying, hey, you know what? Thank you for giving up your summers and coming to play with us, and we're going to put you on that team. What bothers me is, and like I said, I am not a Duke apologist. I think the only times that I've ever rooted for Duke is if they play Michigan, right? Mm-hmm. But there's this misconception of Christian Laettner of being the rich pretty boy who just gets things handed to him. He came from a very modest working class family. He had no money. He was way poorer than Grant Hill ever was when he was at Duke. And they always say, wow, that's so dumb. They put that college kid on. They just did it for him. They would never, ever do that again, right? That's what people always say that all the time. Well, people are wrong all the time because Emeka Okafor, he was a college player that never played in the NBA, and he was on the 2004 team. And then Anthony Davis was a college player, and he was never in the NBA, and he was on the 2012 team. So don't tell me Christian Laettner's getting favoritism just because, he's, pretty boy Abercrombie and Finch Christian Laettner. They put Emeka Okafor and Anthony Davis the same thing, right? It's the same. So people don't remember that, or they choose not to remember that, or they just want to pick and pile on Christian Laettner. But it happened again. This isn't a one-off.
I think it's a Duke thing too, right? Because there's a certain image of Duke, and there's a lot of hate that Duke gets, and they've it's kind of like Alabama in football, right? Sort of they feel like the powers that be in those sports in the NCAA kind of gear things in favor of those teams. But you're right. I think he's worked hard to get where he's at, and he demonstrated sort of the best skill set in college that year. Mm-hmm. So you're right. It wasn't that he was given a favor to be on that team.
And people need to stop with the Christian Laettner was an NBA bust storyline. Oh, no, because he was a really good player in the NBA. And was he a Hall of Fame player? No. But look, he was the third pick. Do you know how many Hall of Famers have been the third pick in the NBA draft? There's been 55 third picks. 7 are in the Hall of Fame. There's been 20 that have been all NBA, 26 guys that have been all-stars. Christian Laettner was an all-star. There's been 7 rookies of the year, And there's been 25 that's been none of those. So more than half of all number 3 overall picks haven't even been in an All-Star game. Christian Laettner did. He averaged 12.8 points, 6.7 rebounds, 2.6 assists. Did you know that Tony Kukoc, who is in the Hall of Fame, Tony Kukoc, he was 11.6 points per game. Less than a point than Christian Laettner. He was 4.2 rebounds. He was 2 rebounds less than Christian Laettner. He had about one assist more per game. They both played 13 years. The difference is Tony Kukoc played on a good team with the Bulls, with Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan got him 3 championships. Oh, yeah, Tony Kukoc, Hall of Fame. But Tony Kukoc and Christian Laettner had the same career. Look at Draymond Green. Everyone goes, oh, Draymond Green, surefire Hall of Famer. Draymond Green, right? Surefire Hall of Famer. Draymond Green averages 8.4 points per game. Laettner, 12.8. Draymond Green, great rebounder. A rebound less per game than Christian Laettner. Now, he does have more assists per game, but a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's throwing to Steph and Clay, the 2 best three-point shooters in the NBA for years. Steph may be the best shooter of all time. He's going to pick up an extra assist because Christian Laettner was playing on Minnesota and Atlanta, who's going to shoot those threes, right? So you can see how that happened. But to say that Christian Laettner is garbage in the NBA, and I see that all the time. He's garbage. He's terrible. He's a flop. He's a bust. You want to know what a bust is? A bust is Anthony Bennett. When you're the number 1 overall pick for Cleveland, and they could have had Giannis, they could have had CJ McCollum, they could have had Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and they take Anthony Bennett. It's Greg Oden. When Greg Oden's out of the league in a couple of years, you could have had Kevin Durant. It's Darko Milicic, who gets picked before Carmelo Anthony and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. That's a bust. Look at who the guys were taken after Christian Laettner in that draft. Right? Oh, yeah, you had Alonzo Mourning taking 1 pick before him, Shaq 2 before him. After that, who do you want? Jim Jackson? Jim Jackson's probably the best player. Robert Horry? People that go, oh, well, LaFonso Ellis? He had the same career numbers, slightly better than LaFonso Ellis. And you could say LaFonso Ellis, and nobody's saying LaFonso Ellis is a bust. Everyone's saying LaFonso Ellis had a good career. Christian Laettner was more athletic and had better numbers. And they had the same career, same number of years. So don't give me Christian Laettner as a bust. Don't.
I want to say something about Robert Horry. I have to defend Robert Horry because I met Robert Horry and he had some very high praise of me personally. So for that, you deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. But I wanted to...
He wants to be in the Hall of Fame with his 5 points per game less than Christian Laettner and his full 2 rebounds.
But he recognized my talent.
Right. But what I'm saying is people will say, oh, look, would you rather, at the end of the day, have Christian Laettner or Robert Horry?
No, I agree with what you're saying. I do think the Christian Laettner's got a better career than people want to give him credit for. I think some of that comes from the expectations that he entered the NBA with. Right? Mm-hmm. I think everyone thought it was, be a surefire Hall of Famer, 2-time, back-to-back championships, consensus top college player of the year. He's on the dream team, right? You're going to be amazing if you're selected to be on the dream team. So I think it's all kind of, a lot of those things, the narratives that the media will paint about someone doesn't always necessarily match up. And then people have their skewed perception and ideas of who the player is or who the player isn't. But I think it's interesting, especially the Kukoc numbers comparison there. It's definitely interesting. I don't think a lot of people have really looked into the numbers that closely. So, I also wanted to talk about another NBA post we made, and this is actually about a Team USA basketball player, but not the 1992 Dream Team, but it was the 2000, and it was Vince Carter. And on May 11th in 2001, Vinsanity scored a franchise playoff record 50 points in Game 3 in a win over the Sixers. He had 9 3-point shots in the first half, and he chipped in 7 assists. Although Philly went on to win the series, but Vince Carter, I think, showed off his versatility that oftentimes he gets overlooked for, right? A lot of times people associate him with sort of just dunks, right? Air Canada, right? That was his nickname. He's high flying dunks, but he was an all around amazing offensive player, right? He wasn't a one trick pony.
No, he could do just about everything. And it's funny when you talk about, did Christian Laettner live up to expectations? And then you look at Vince Carter and you're like, I don't know. Did Vince Carter live up to expectations? Although Vince Carter he had way better numbers than Christian Laettner. But if you talk to anybody in the first 3-4 years of Vince Carter's career, he was the next Jordan. He could do everything physically that you needed to be the best player in basketball. And it never really panned out for him to be the best player in basketball. And he became a star and a highlight reel guy, but he never became Jordan or LeBron or Kareem or one of the all-time greats, even though he had every physical ability and every quality, and he had a really great mid-range jumper. He could get to the basket anytime he wanted. He played, some suspect defense, but he was as athletic as it gets. And I think a lot of times that gets overlooked because you think about the dunks, but he's sitting 11th on the all-time three-point list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the thing people forget about him is that he was kind of an unselfish player, right? He would set his teammates up, pick and rolls, and he would read the defense well, pass the ball. And he wasn't just out there hunting points, hunting threes, trying to just dunk at every possible chance. He was trying to win as a team. And I think that's probably reflected in some of his numbers being a little bit depressed than they could have been based on his talent. He never really placed higher than 10th in MVP voting, considering how good he was in his skill set. And so, he was Rookie of the Year, but that was probably his biggest accolade. And I think just speaking to his all-around game and his all-around sort of basketball IQ and his ability to control the court and get his teammates involved probably speaks well to him as a player and a leader and really as a mentor more than it does on his stat sheet.
Yeah, and he really changed and evolved his game as he got older and was willing to accept a role player role, which a lot of guys really weren't at the time. If you look at somebody like Carmelo Anthony, who was running around, hunting a championship, going to whatever team would take him. But Carmelo never really latched on to that, I'm going to be a sixth man. And, there's an interview with Kobe Bryant about Vince Carter. And Kobe had said, I could never accept being a sixth man. Like, I couldn't do it. I would retire. I would rather not play than be a sixth man. And he was willing to do that. But I think where he gets dinged is like I said, he did shoot a lot of three-pointers. But what's crazy is he's 11th most on the career three-points made. He's 10th most on career threes taken, but he's 241st on three-point shooting percentage. So that's a lot of missed threes at 37.1%.
Right.
But there were nights that he was 9 of 12, and he made it look easy when it came to being able to do that.
Yeah, I think he had a couple seasons, maybe more, multiple seasons where he shot 38-40% from three-point range. So he definitely had his moments where he could definitely, especially earlier in his career. But I wanted to go back to your point about sort of evolving his game and accepting a different role. In his late 30s and even into early 40s, he was averaging probably 20 minutes a game still. Mm-hmm. And I think that really speaks to him sort of rethinking what kind of player he is and trying to figure out how he can contribute coming off the bench, not necessarily starting, but still contributing in a very meaningful way. And that speaks well to sort of his sort of broader vision of the court and how he could facilitate the ball and get his teammates involved, as I mentioned.
Yeah, you just think about with him, it's like the missed opportunities. He's remembered an awful lot for missing the shot against the Sixers that would have advanced them in the playoffs. and that people are always not clutch, except that he had 16 game-winning shots in his career, and that's second behind only LeBron, who had 17. So he retired when he left the game. He had the most buzzer beater game-winning shots. And you think about the missed opportunities in Toronto with he and his cousin Tracy McGrady, and how that Toronto team was sort of right on the cusp of being better when Tracy McGrady left and went to Orlando for that big deal. And then he was sort of lost without a secondary player in order to help him. And you think about the lost opportunities when he got to the Nets, because the Nets had been irrelevant for a very long time. And here they are with Vince Carter and Jason Kidd and Richard Jefferson, and they make the playoffs for 2 years. But what's crazy about that whole situation is, at the end of the day, when he was in New Jersey with those three guys, they went 158 and 170. They lost more games. Those three guys together lost more games than they won. And that's so strange to think about, because you would look at that threesome as a team that should be able to win the East.
Yeah. Team chemistry, roster construction, all of that plays into it. I think that most people remember him for his sort of Toronto years, but he had a lot of career left after that, and he played for 22 seasons. So
I always think of Vince Carter as this: he is far more than you ever thought he was, and he is not quite who you thought he was.
Yeah, that's a great point, because when I was looking at his numbers and sort of refreshing myself with his stats, I was surprised that he never placed higher than 10th on MVP voting, because that's and there were only a few years that he got MVP votes for as much as he was sort of marketed and branded as sort of this, one of the top players in the NBA. He did appear in 8 All-Star games, so he has some recognition there. But it felt like the sort of his dunks were what he got marketed for the best, but there was still a lot more to his game.
And the best in-game dunker that there ever was. The greatest in-game dunk in the history of basketball was when he jumped over Friedrich Weiss at the Olympics from France, the 7-4. But also, hey, I just want to put this in for everybody who's still mad at me for Christian Laettner. That Christian Laettner he averaged 2 rebounds per game more than Vince Carter. Just saying.
There you go.
I know there's still people that are mad about Christian Laettner.
Christian Laettner's a very polarizing individual. So,
and I think that was far more likable. If you ever saw that 30 for 30, I still hate Christian Laettner.
Yeah.
When I watched, that was sort of the turning point for me, and I was like, you know what? There's a lot about him that I got wrong, in just of what my perception was versus the reality. And I always like, whatever the truth is, Jeff, I just want the truth so that I can make a decision. And I hate it when I think something is true and it's not. And when I investigate it and learn about it, I can sort of see why it happened and what happened, which is why I love these posts that you do. That there's more to these individuals than you might originally think. But one thing, though, that Christian Laettner did not do, that Vince Carter did do, was Vince Carter received a saxophone scholarship to Bethune-Cookman College, and he turned it down to go play basketball at North Carolina.
Wow, I didn't know that. He could have been a great jazz player if not
He could have been the next Wayman Tisdale.
That's
and
right.
If you haven't seen the Wayman Tisdale Saxophone Christmas Show, go see it.
All right, well, let's move on to NHL. We did have some NHL posts, and on May 16th in 1996, something extremely famous occurred in the NHL. And we know that NHL is not as popular as in the United States as the NFL, the NBA, or even baseball. But there is something that happened on that date that has its own GIF, which is pretty incredible for an NHL play, and that is Steve Yzerman's iconic slap shot to win Game 7 of the Western Conference semifinals. It was scoreless all the way through double overtime, and he scored the winning goal. It came away. They won it 1-0. Game 7, it actually came on a misplay by Wayne Gretzky, which you don't really see very often. And eventually Detroit would move on, but they would lose in the Western Finals to the Avs. So on that was just such a remarkable year for the NHL playoffs. What do you remember about that year?
Well, the first thing to remember about that particular year was the Wayne Gretzky in St. Louis partial season. He got traded from the Kings at the deadline, and that's always hey, remember when Wayne Gretzky was a St. Louis Blue? It's like when Joe Namath was a Ram. It's just one of the things you kind of forget that happened. Mike Piazza played for the A's. You're like, what? Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Wayne Gretzky.
It's funny. I just want to say about that, because we were doing something on Wayne Gretzky, I think a couple weeks ago, and I was looking up something like, wait, he was on St. Louis? Oh yeah, that's right. He was on St. Louis.
Yeah, he's on St. Louis just for that. Just a traded deadline, played through with them through the playoffs, and then he went off and signed as a free agent with the Rangers. But that play is crazy, and it does have that gift, and it's one of those goals that is part of every NHL compilation. It is the classic slap shot from just inside the blue line, past John Casey, right into the corner. They had a camera in the world's most perfect spot in order to capture it. But that goal is really famous for beyond just the video, because that was the goal that gave the NHL one of its most marketable streaks and years. And that was because Detroit won, and Detroit went on to play Colorado for the first time in the playoffs. That started that Red Wings Colorado Avalanche brouhaha that lasted 6 years. Mm-hmm. That was the game that sent them to the playoffs, where Claude Lemieux sucker punched Vladislav Kozlov, and where Claude Lemieux hit Chris Draper's face into the boards and had to get skull surgery. That's the origin story of that feud. All begins with this goal that Stevie Yzerman puts past John Casey. And John Casey, remember, he was only in because Hall of Famer Grant Fuhrer, who is one heck of a dude, Grant Fuhrer got there was a cross check in the Toronto series, and he tore his ACL. Chris Pronger hit Nick Kyrgios in the back. Nick Kyrgios plays tennis. Nick Kyrgios in the back, and he tore his ACL. And Grant Fuhrer was out for the year. And so John Casey had to go in and play that series. If they have Grant Fuhrer, if St. Louis has Grant Fuhrer, they probably beat Detroit. But all of those things happened in that goal that set that motion of, one of the greatest feuds that really helped the popularization of the NHL in the United States in the mid to late 90s.
Yeah, it's so, that Wayne Gretzky trade to St. Louis was, as I said, it just something you totally forget about. Mm-hmm. And I forgot about Grant Fuhrer as well. You think of these players, you go back, you're like, oh yeah, Edmonton, and Wayne Gretzky, of course, Edmonton, and then the Kings. So it was such a huge deal when he came to the Kings because.
Oh, for sure. And Gretzky didn't play poorly in St. Louis. He played 18 games. He had 8 goals, 12 assists in the 18 games. In the playoffs, he had 13 games, 2 goals, 14 assists. So more than a point per game, which is what Wayne Gretzky does. But yeah, he had a really bad turnover that led to that iconic goal. I said, go look up the GIF. You can find that. It's on every single NHL compilation of great goals.
Yeah,
and it was one of those things where the video was way better than the still.
Yeah, and if you go to our Facebook page, you'll find it on May 16th. You'll see the GIF of that goal. But you brought up the sort of the photograph and the still. I actually was thinking about just sports photography in general, because I'm a huge fan of sports photography. I think there's something about still shots and photography that you don't really get from video, and I feel like we're sort of moving away from some of that just with how technology is and how people consume media now. Do you have a favorite sort of iconic sports photograph? Any sport, not just hockey.
There's a couple. I think the Muhammad Ali standing over Sonny Liston is like everyone puts that as number one, and there's a reason. It was so good. But even if you think about hockey, and you think, remember Bobby Orr's flying goal? If you go back and watch the video, it's kind of a nothing goal. It's just a little give and go from behind the net. And granted, it won the Stanley Cup, also against St. Louis. Poor Blues, we're really not picking on you today. But it's not great on video. It's fantastic on the still. Yeah. Same with his name escapes me, the surfer from the Paris Olympics. I remember that he's just like standing in midair, and when you see the video of it, it's nothing. It's just off the board, just like every other time. But it is an absolutely perfect captured moment. So those are what I remember, and I remember how important Sports Illustrated was when we were growing up, and you could see these color photos of these places that you rarely got to see on TV. You got to see what the Rose Bowl looked like on a photo. I only ever saw the Rose Bowl once a year on January 1st. And sometimes it was rainy, but this is a beautiful, clear day, and you can really see the colors of USC and UCLA in a way that you couldn't on an old tube TV with dodgy satellite transmission, might even been antenna wire transmission at the time. So those sports photographs created something and a connection in a way that most of the time the video cheapens. Yzerman exception, Carlton Fisk the exception with the waving of the home run at Game 6 of the 76 World Series. But there certainly there's a missing of how great those iconic sports photos can be and how important they used to be.
Yeah, I love the one that I think doesn't get enough attention is Usain Bolt in the 2008 Olympics, where he's pulling away from the look on his face and how much distance there's between him and the next runner. But actually, I was thinking about the reverse. There's some things that are better in video, and I think of Willie Mays in The Catch, because the picture's obviously amazing, but the most amazing thing about The Catch is what he did right after he caught the ball. How he did a complete 180 spin and got it in, like as a dart. So that sometimes there's things that are better in video, but I think the sad thing for me, because like I said, I do love sports photography so much, but I think we're moving into an era where there's branding has so much to do with photography and media that's put out there, and teams are now there's less media orchestrating sort of those classic photographs where you have kind of an impartial observer, and there's a lot more teams trying to build their brand and promote sort of certain images or certain players, moments, things like that. So you lose a little bit of that when you don't have that kind of third party person looking at everything objectively.
Yeah, another one of those is Bob Beamon when he broke the long jump record in Mexico City. And there's a great photo from the end of the pit with him so high in the air and his legs outstretched. But the amazing thing is when you see the video and you see just how far he jumped. Particularly not if you don't see the video of the head on, if you see it side, because then you can truly see the distance that he did. But there was a really great documentary on, I want to say that it was on ESPN E60. It could have been a 30 for 30, but I think it was an E60, where they had talked to a couple of guys that have been sports photographers their whole life and about how it's changed with video. And I remember one of the iconic pictures from that was Otis Sistrunk of the Raiders when he was sitting on the bench and the steam is coming off his bald head. Right. And the guy that took that picture, he said it was on a Monday Night Football game, and he said, "I got the greatest picture. This is going to be on everything." And then he looked over, and there was the ABC camera, and the whole world had already seen his picture. And he was like, "Man, like it's over." He was like, "That's the moment I knew that it was over," in terms of what what it's been. And I agree with what you said. There's so many of the teams are putting out their own news and their own photos, and it's not coming from the sports pages of newspapers that are out there taking photos. They're running what the team sends them or what the team
Right.
approves them, and nobody wants to pay for photographers to go and be places. And so it's a dying art, and that's unfortunate because there's been so many great sports photographs throughout the years.
Yeah, I love taking pictures at games that I go to, just trying to capture sort of moments that it's like you have to be there to witness it, and sometimes some of those sort of moments you wouldn't really think of, like something in the crowd or something that's not taking place on the field, sort of a look or an expression from maybe a player in the dugout or on the sidelines. I love some of those sort of candid moments that are really interesting to me, and you don't get that anymore in our day and age of just everything is trying to break through with eyeball clicks and eyeballs and likes and so forth.
Yeah, and that's something too that's lost with technology, and that these digital images are great and they're sharp, right? But there's something about shooting on film, and there's something about it being real. I remember remember the movie Tombstone, Kurt Russell. And I was watching that with somebody, and they were saying, "Wow, that set looks really good. Is that green screen?" And I'm like, "No, this is shot in the '90s. Like that's location. That's all built practical set, and it's shot on film, and that's why it looks so good to you, and that's why you're sitting there going, "Wow, I can't believe a movie looks this good."
Yeah.
That's how movies used to look. They're shot with real light on real sets with real film, and that's the way that these old sports photographers used to do. It was real film developed. It wasn't something that you could just look in your camera and shoot 100 of them and throw them away. Every picture was valuable because every picture cost you money, and they looked so much better. These old cameras shot on film as opposed to the digital prints that we get all the time.
Yeah, agree. Okay, I want to move on a little bit more hockey. And we had a moment with the Boston Bruins on May 13th, 2013. They made history. They were down 4-1 with a little more than 14 minutes to go in the game, and they erased a 3-goal deficit. They go on to OT, and they pull off a dramatic and historic win. They became the first team ever in Game 7 to rally from 3 goals down and win. Patrice Bergeron was the star. Not only did he tie it up, but he also scored the winning goal in overtime. What do you remember from that? And the Bruins had kind of a tiny run there from sort of the 2010-11 season through 2012-2013 season. So it's really just a 3-year window, but it was a pretty good run for the Bruins during that time.
It was. They won the Stanley Cup in 2011. They beat Vancouver. They were sort of a team that was on the rise, and you had thought, hey, maybe the Bruins are going to put it together for 5 years. Well, they did. They did make it to the Stanley Cup final this year. They lost to Chicago. They sort of rolled through the rest of the playoffs, but it was an up and down season for them. And 2012-13, that was the strike year. So
Right.
They had to play a ton of games in a very short amount of time. They played 48 games in 99 days. And it had all the sort of earmarks of being a season that the Bruins were going to look so good and throw away, which for a lot of Bruin fans, that has become a norm, more so than I think they would probably like. But they were sitting in first place on April 11th, and they went 2-7 down the stretch, and they didn't score more than 2 goals in a game but one time over that stretch, and they just limped into the playoffs. And it all seemed like it was going badly, because when Nazem Kadri scored that goal, they put him up 3 in the third period. It wasn't even like they started the third period with a 3-goal lead. They were down 2, and then it was 3 halfway through, and it looked like, oh wow, hey, Toronto's finally going to pull this off. And it looked like a sad moment for Boston, because Phil Kessel, who was their superstar up and coming, they traded him to Toronto, and he had the assist on Kadri's goal. And so it was almost like the whole sky was falling until until Toronto, unfortunately, does what Toronto does an awful lot, and that's throw games away late. And Milan Lucic, I think, is sort of the unsung hero, not just of this game, but of that Bruins run. He was so good for a player who's really, physical, a fighter, an enforcer, not necessarily an offensive player, but he had 30 goals in their cup season. He had a bunch of goals in this playoff. He had, to put it in perspective, he had 7 goals during that 48-game season. He had 7 goals in the playoffs.
Yeah, I was thinking about that period since we've been talking about Boston itself. This whole week has been with the Celtics. There's been a lot of Boston talk, and it's interesting in that window where the Bruins were pretty good. It was also a big period for the Red Sox, for the Patriots, right? They were winning, and they didn't necessarily all win in the exact same years, but they were all kind of going through their dynasty motions, which is probably the best time overall in Boston sports history, because at any time you could see if you're a Boston fan, the Bruins could win it all, the Red Sox could win it all, the Patriots could win it all, and they did at various times. You had the Red Sox won it in 2007 and then didn't win it again until 2013, and then they won again in 2018. And then the Patriots, obviously, we know Tom Brady and all the championships they won. They got in 2011, and then it skipped to 2014, then 2016, and 2018. And so the Bruins are right in it, and right in that sort of kind of golden period of Boston sports.
Yeah, it was the best of times, and it was also the worst of times, because just a few weeks earlier was when the Boston bombing had happened at the Marathon. And so they were right sort of in the middle of Boston Strong, and they were sort of carrying the torch for the team. And it was a really a neat time for the Bruins, and the way that they had sort of intertwined with the Maple Leafs during the series was interesting, because not just Phil Kessel had been traded from Boston to Toronto, and he came back to bite the Bruins, but Tuukka Rask was a draft pick of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and he had made his way to Boston, and the goaltender that got away ended up being a really key cog in this. And it's funny we talked about Gretzky, because everybody forgets that Jaromir Jagr was a Boston Bruin for part of this season.
That's right.
He was just like Gretzky, and that was at the time that Jaromir Jagr was playing Ricky Henderson, and he's trying to be on every single team in the league. He had played for Philly and Dallas and Boston and the Rangers and the Devils and Washington, like in a 5 or 6 year period. It was like every other year Jaromir Jagr was someplace else. Didn't play quite as well. 2 goals, 7 assists in the 11 games. But yeah, it was funny to see Jaromir Jagr in his first ballot Hall of Fame mullet in the highlights of this series.
I wanted to ask you thoughts on Patrice Bergeron, because he was at the center of our sports post, but also in 2011 in Game 7, he had 2 goals in their shutout for their win. They shut out Vancouver 4-0. Any thought? He hasn't get talked about much, but he's sort of a central figure in
Oh, he's a really central figure in that they decided that they were going to build the team around Patrice Bergeron, because they had Joe Thornton. He was their guy, and they traded Joe Thornton to San Jose so that they could make this Patrice Bergeron's team. And he had the big goal to tie it, and he had the big goal to send them on through the playoffs in overtime. But the way that he was able to play, particularly was said with a guy like Milan Lucic, who was his protector, and he kept everything clean for Patrice Bergeron. And the two of them together worked so well in a way that, unfortunately for Milan Lucic, who gets a bad rap from Edmonton Oilers fans. I know everyone in Edmonton is cursing Milan Lucic, because he was supposed to do the same thing when he got to Edmonton, and he just wasn't able to because he got old and he got slow, which is what happens to players like him. And if you're going to be mad at Milan Lucic Edmonton, be mad at Peter Chiarelli for giving him 7 years and $42 million. Because he's never going to be who he was for Boston. But he worked so well with Bergeron, and I think Bergeron's another one of those guys that was very good for a very specific period of time and gets overlooked.
Yeah. Okay, I want to. We have a few minutes left. I want to talk about the Preakness. We have to mention that the Preakness happened this weekend, and on May 17th, we posted about the Preakness back in 1975, because on that date, Master Derby, who was the biggest long shot in Preakness history to win the race. And for Master Derby, it was the only Triple Crown race win for jockey Daryl McHarg and trainer William Adams. But huge win, huge upset. And first I want to ask, did you watch the Preakness this weekend?
I did, even though I know there were a lot of people that were disappointed that the Kentucky Derby champion did not run. They said that it just wasn't in the cards. It didn't bounce back well. They sort of had not really planned on running the Preakness anyway, and then they just happened to win the Kentucky Derby, and they decided to stick with their plan. And I did watch it. I thought it was great. Laurel Park did a fantastic job hosting this year. They're renovating the Preakness track there at Pimlico. And so they did down in Laurel Park, which is about 30 minutes south of there. And I thought it was great that they were able to step up and do it there, not have to move it to Gulfstream Park, which is what they had talked about doing. So good on you, Maryland Racing Association. But it was a pretty good race. Mm-hmm. It was everything you wanted it to be.
Yeah, I watched it with my daughter. We were, we had our horse picked out. We were just had it's nice because it's just you put it on, you run the race, then you watch it and go about your day. So pretty quick, unless you're into a lot of the sort of storylines and so forth leading up to it. But jumped on to watch the race. But I, kind of wanted to ask you sort of your thoughts as a horse racing fan. Do you like to have sort of a dominant horse win, or sort of that be the storyline, or do you like the storyline of the long shot sort of outsider that pulls the big upset?
I will give you two answers. The first answer, as a horse player, I want my ticket to cash. I do not care. Anything else, good story, bad story, whatever, I want my ticket to cash. As a sort of media person or an analyst or as a fan, I think it depends on what the storyline is. And there are great champions that you want to see dominance from. Like, you want to see American Pharoah win the Triple Crown because it's a dominant horse. You want to see Secretariat win the Belmont by 26 lengths because it's a dominant horse, and there's something beautiful about that domination. But then there are great stories from mid favorites all the way to long shots that have more to do with the owner and the trainer and the jock, that you just want them to win. Like a Fleet Alex from the Triple Crown races several years ago, and her biggest fan, who was a little girl dying from cancer and selling lemonade, and so you pull for them, or you pull for a jockey like Calvin Burrell, who has been around and has never been able to get over the hump, and so you root for a guy like that. You root for D. Wayne Lucas. Because you know that he's probably not going to be alive next year. So, like last year when D. Wayne Lucas was in the Triple Crown, you pulled for him because of what he's meant for the sport. So I think for me, like I said, it really kind of depends on what the storyline is. But it's a pretty good story, though, for Master Derby, who ran a kind of meh Kentucky Derby back in 1975. But really ran a great Preakness and was able to hold off the favorite, Foolish Pleasure, who made a really late charge in that race. And it looked like, for all intents and purposes, with a furlong to go, that he was going to get caught. And you don't typically see a horse be able to hold off a charge that easily A lot of times you'll see him nipped at the wire. If they win by a nose. But once he felt his presence, he was able to keep it and stay there. And good on you to the jockey, Daryl McCargue, who, interestingly enough, was the number one jock at Laurel Park in 1973. So Laurel Park connection to the Preakness, even though it was at Pimlico in 1975.
Yeah, I wanted to say, going back to what you had mentioned about if we like the favorite or if we like the long shot. I think I'm a little bit like you. If there's a chance to make history, as to win the Triple Crown, you're never going to see a long shot really have a chance to win a Triple Crown. It has to be a dominant horse. Lightning can strike once, but you're not going to get Lightning to strike 2 or 3 times. So it's fun to root for that, right? If you like American Pharoah, if horse has a chance because they're strong. But if it's not, if that horse isn't running or you get sort of these sort of long shots that come out of nowhere, like Master Derby. It's great to watch history and see sort of some of these storylines as the trainer who really didn't expect to go very far suddenly does great and wins the Preakness or the Belmont or the Kentucky Derby or whatever the storyline is. Those are fun too. So I think I'm a little bit like you. It just kind of depends on what's going on in the sport and where we're at it from the day.
And it's kind of fun because you can have somebody that, or a syndicate full of people that own just a little portion of the horse that have everyday jobs, and they can win the Kentucky Derby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like you and I, it doesn't matter. Like, we're never going to win the World Series. We talk all the time about how wouldn't it be great if we could buy a team and win the World Series. We'll never be able to do that. But we could own a piece of a horse that wins the Kentucky Derby, and I think that's what's so cool about it. It's the only sport, even though it's a sport of millionaires and billionaires, it's the only sport that's still accessible to people that pay $2 to get into the infield.
All right, well, on that note, we're going to call it. We'll wrap things up. As always, Clayton, thanks for being here. Appreciate your knowledge and insights, and always enjoy chatting with you, learning more about the history with you. And for everyone out there, follow us along. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Substack. Follow us on YouTube. You can watch all of our past episodes on YouTube at Sports and Leisure. We're at Facebook at Sports and Leisure, same as Substack. So check us out, comment, subscribe, and if you do comment, we'll be sure to bring it up here in our next episode and talk about a little bit of what people out there are talking about with our history. All right, Clayton, have a great week. I'll see you next time.
You too, man.
Thank you.